Hello, ladies and gentlemen. It is I, Emily Sophia, aka Mighty Sophia, and I am back. Yes, it has been a few weeks since my last video, but I'm finally here to break down for you all the first season of the AMC series Preacher. So, the beginning of this review is going to be spoiler-free, although I will be providing a synopsis of the premise of the show that alludes to certain situations that occur, not in explicit detail, but I'll let you know when to tune out, just in case you don't want any hints about those kinds of things. And then the rest of the review is going to be more spoiler-filled, and I will explain exactly what I loved about the show, things that I would perhaps critique. But yeah, that's basically going to be the scope of this. Let's dive right in because I got a lot of ground to cover, baby. So here we go. Preacher excels at lampooning and satirizing organized religion. Okay. It explores the concepts of religious fanaticism, charismatic faith, false worship, spiritual doubt, hypocrisy, omnipotence, moral absolutes, and countless other themes of institutionalized Christianity. And it often cleverly criticizes, subverts, or tests to fire these different ideas in the framework of a very reckless supernatural thriller. The show exposes the messy underbelly of religion in ways that you would definitely expect of a spiritual satire, but not in a way that should isolate or inspire outrage in practicing Christians. I say this from the perspective of a person who is a Christian and love the hell out of this show. So the series derives its humor from humanizing the divine, is what I would say. Blasphemous though that in and of itself may be, Preacher still serves up a delightfully irreverent black comedy that's shocking and silly. And it basically contrasts the ineptitudes of the saints with the streetwise wisdom of the sinners. The show pretty much completely deconstructs the heavenly hierarchy and pretty much renders the afterlife a place that's just as rife with chaos as the earth below. And maybe, just maybe, that's why things are so ridiculously rotten. Heaven and hell, darkness and light, it's all mixed together. What is mankind to do when its maker seems to be just as lost as his delinquent kids? The series does manage to pose some hard-hitting questions about human suffering and depravity, but provides a very bizarre and comical reason for why God doesn't seem to be very forthcoming with the answers or solutions. It doesn't reinforce the notion that God is an all-knowing and ever-present ruler of the universe, but it does show how people who are honest, curious, and skeptical in their different forms of faith have a leg up on people who take everything at face value or try to use religion to further their own agendas. All this being said, Preacher isn't exactly interested in righting all of religion's wrongs or gunning for world peace, at least not on the surface. It abolishes the sacred bounds between life and death, depicting murder and mayhem in ways that are hilariously serious and seriously hilarious. It shatters realities and systems of belief at every turn, ultimately sending our anti-heroic heroes on a mission with an outcome that couldn't possibly be more ambiguous. It corrupts the pious messages of old-school church reader boards. It turns guardian angels into bumbling assassins. It turns sermons into circuses. It turns all things abstract into flesh, blood, and jaw-dropping bedlam. This universe is bereft of guilt, sense, or boundaries of any kind, and for that reason, it is a special sort of brilliant. I should also mention that it's got an excellent opening sequence, stellar visuals, a perfect synergy of special and practical effects, a soulful, tongue-in-cheek soundtrack that perfectly complements the mood and mayhem. Preacher's done a lot of things right in bringing this oh-so-wrong world to life. So, here's the premise. In Synopsis, I don't consider there to be spoilers in this, but if you want to tune out now, you can. So here we go. Once upon a time, a man by the name of Jesse Custer showed up in a blistering little Texan town by the name of Annville. It's a town where he isn't exactly wanted or welcome, but where he intends to carry out a promise made to a dying man. So, stepping into the shoes of a minister, Mr. Custer takes up his father's cross at All Saints Congregational and embarks on his mission of saving this iniquitous city. He comes with ambitions of shepherding the Lord's sheep, pasturing his flock, and guiding stumbling souls toward conviction and repentance. But pointing the local townsfolk to God is a task easier said than done, at least at first. It's a small town, but it's a hothouse for sin, hate, and perversion. The kind of backwards, filthy speck on a map where Jesus himself would show up and start flipping some tables. However, just as Jesse is on the verge of succumbing to his alcoholism, love of bone-breaking violence, and deep-seated spiritual turmoil, Jesse happens to pick up a vocal superpower that allows him to speak with an authority that's nothing short of divine. Unbeknownst to him, his first use of the voice leads to an utter tragedy, the gruesome outcome of a well-intentioned figure of speech being taken to heart and fulfilled in action. Whoops. Soon the man of the cloth becomes a man of his word. Not the Lord's word, per se, as he seems intent on speaking some kind of trouble into roaring existence. Not only imbued with an otherworldly power, Jesse is hemmed in by a colorful array of friends and foes alike, who are as follows. We have Tulip, who is a precocious, freewheeling mercenary who is hell-bent on exposing Jesse's duplicity and rekindling their severed relationship with a little criminal activity. You have Cassidy, who is a century-and-a-half-year-old vampire who thinks The Big Lebowski is overrated, doesn't really mind Justin Bieber, tries not to kill people who don't deserve it, and lusts after blood and an all-you-can-snort buffet of other drugs. Then there's Emily, a resolute single mother, talented church organist, and sensible, forbearing, yet premeditative woman whose crush on Jesse by no means spares her a glimpse or two into his twisted world. We have Sheriff Hugo Root, the grim and tortured law enforcement official, whose facially disfigured son has become the pariah of their community. And then you have Eugene, who is the son. He is a thoughtful, genuine, and God-fearing young man whose seeming heart of gold is buried beneath a face that even a mother would struggle to love. And he also seeks out Jesse's sometimes questionable counsel as he grapples with the guilt over his role in a local girl's terminal coma. And then you have Donnie and Betsy Schenk, a married couple with very erotic, adventurous tastes in life, and complicated ties to both Jesse and Jesse's mortal nemesis, which leads me to Odin Kincannon. He is the malicious, meat-loving, and all-around unlikable proprietor of a powerful slaughterhouse business known as Kincannon Meat and Power. He detests religion, Jesse's father, and Jesse himself, and he wants to expand his cutthroat empire by transforming the land on which Jesse's church sits into commercial property. A sure triumph and a middle finger towards the treacherous man upstairs. There are also a few heavenly beings who have touched down in Annville, including the angelic duo of Fior and Blanc, who have come to Earth on an unsanctioned mission to reclaim a potent hybrid entity born of a scandalous divine affair. Okay? This is Jesse's strange, surreal, borderline dystopian world in a nutshell. There's much more to it than that, and trust me, the insanity that you have to fork over at the entryway is a price that's worth paying. So now, here is where I need to discuss some minor issues that I had with the show, and we're about to get into some spoilery stuff. So, if you haven't tuned out by this point, you haven't seen the show yet, you might want to check out now. It's up to you. But anyway, so, a few problems. Preacher ended up kind of lagging and lingering at points where the story and its progression should have felt more propulsive and energized. The show's bombastic characters certainly took center stage on a regular basis, but their setting grew stagnant over the first season's 10-episode runtime. Thank God we had some serious scenery chewers on our hands, like the scathingly sassy Ruth Negga and the comedically consistent Joe Gilgan. Without the likes of them, it probably would have been more difficult to forgive the story's disjointed narrative. Yeah, that is what I would say. So that being said, the different plots and subplots that comprise the season's overall story progressed in a way that is reminiscent of an octopus moving its tentacles. Allow me to explain this suction cup appendage metaphor. It's gonna get weird. I don't understand why I came up with this. This is what I'm going with. So in the show, we had backstories aplenty, like those for Jesse, Tulip, Cassidy, and even Kincannon, and others that had very few ties to the main narrative up until a few last-second revelations, namely that of the cowboy and his broken record residence in his Ratwater hell. This is to say nothing of the stories that are situated directly in the present, and those, admittedly, from my perspective and in my opinion, became mildly repetitive over time, even when they were punctured by grisly battles, extravagant showdowns, fractured relationships, heavenly epiphanies, and hellish misdeeds. All very entertaining stuff. At any rate, most of these stories moved forward in short bursts and bite-sized increments, kind of like an octopus that's advancing itself forward by moving just one tentacle at a time. You know, a tentacle for each subplot, and they're all kind of going... Bah, 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 bah. I don't know if you can visualize this. If I was a skilled graphic artist, I would visually depict this for you, but alas, I do not possess those skills. So I feel like some of the sub-stories would have been better served by receiving a majority of the spotlight over the course of an episode, as opposed to every single thread being slowly unspooled over the better part of 10. Now, the good news is that I highly doubt we're going to have the same problem of story fragmentation and uneven pacing in the season to come. Now that Anvil's out of the picture, ostensibly for good, I hope that the story will move more freely, coherently, and with a little less baggage and repetitiveness. The first season progressed like a strange tentacled beast, at least in my opinion, stumbling over its many legs, but remaining disturbingly entertaining with every stride. And basically what I've told all of my friends about the show is that I feel like they could have maybe done the season in 6 episodes instead of 10, like the first season of The Walking Dead, for example. But just my thought, you know? And there's a reason why the writers and showrunners chose to do what they did, and I think that they largely did so with a lot of success. So, with regards to some of the plots in Preacher's first season as well, I feel like we often found ourselves working without all of the information necessary for fully appreciating the bedlam that we were witnessing. And I would largely attribute this issue to the non-linear and semi-fragmented storytelling that I've just described. The thing is, there's a lot that isn't explained up front, and there are plenty of explanations for which you must patiently watch and wait. One example is the issue with Tulip, where she is constantly hounding after Jesse to try to get him back into his life of crime and to get him to go after Carlos, and all of this is dragged out and dragged out and dragged out, and I just wanted to know, like, what was the deal? And we finally get that full flashback much later on. Was it in the finale maybe, or just before the finale? But yeah, I would have liked to know what was going on there so that I wouldn't have felt sometimes annoyed with Tulip, because it's not like it was her fault that we as the audience didn't know why she was going so aggressively after Jesse in the first place. And he just kept saying no, no, no. And she's like, yes, yes, yes. And, you know, so there's that. I also feel that maybe instead of getting introduced to the Saint of Killers so early on and rejoining him later, finally coming to discover that he's been stuck burning in his very own lake of fire, perhaps we could have encountered him around the season's midway point and at that same time learned that he's living out his immortal punishment, you know? This would have more concisely introduced us to Jesse Custer's very own foil character and future adversary, while at the same time establishing the concepts of heaven and hell as they exist in this universe. Had they condensed and reordered things a bit more, I'd have felt a little less lost on a regular basis. Perhaps that's just me and my love of Breaking Bad-esque storytelling that's very distilled and focused and measured, whereas Preacher's style is all about keeping all of its balls up in the air with all of its plot tentacles and keeping you guessing and wondering and dreading all along the way. Now, these are my complaints. Keep in mind the fact that they may very well be mine and mine alone, and they're by no means monumental enough to keep me from tuning in for the second season. I actually think that the sophomore outing is going to be even more kick-ass than its predecessor, and I love reflecting on all of the moments that had me reeling from their sheer ridiculousness. You know, we've got the motel room fight sequence with Fior and DeBlanc and the Seraphim all killing each other over and over. The chainsaw happy church fight sequence with Cassidy and who he thought were vampire slayers. Tulip MacGyvering a bazooka and taking down a helicopter and calling out the imposter god. You know, Emily deciding to feed her stalker to a feral Cassidy. One of my favorite twists in the entire season, I think. There was so much to ooh and ah at in this show, to the point that I am just beside myself with joy at the show's very existence. I also love that the show ends with an apocalyptic methane reactor explosion that levels the entire godforsaken town. That's some Sodom and Gomorrah stuff, if you know the story. Now, thankfully, Jesse and Cassidy and Tulip all turn their backs to Anvil and the television screens broadcasting the tragedy. And I think that their total non-reaction is kind of cathartic in a way, because Anvil just had to go. It had some irreconcilable problems. As to whether or not there are any survivors, I guess we're gonna see, but now it's time for a cross-country road trip with the Saint of Killers trailing not far behind. And we'll see if everybody finds the missing god and restores balance to the universe or some kind of shenanigans. Now, I personally have not read the Preacher comics yet, but I have read Why the Last Man, which is an incredible series. I would highly recommend. And it also features a cross-country and even transnational road trip in a post-apocalyptic world. It's very hard to say. So I think I'm going to enjoy what's to come, and chances are strong that you will too. So I would like to wrap up this review with a little segment, I guess you could call it, called Season Superlatives. Now, if y'all remember, in high school, or maybe you're still in high school, they do those superlative awards for different students in the yearbooks and stuff like that. So I'm going to bestow my very own special awards on all of the different major characters in this season. So, for the esteemed Carlos, I would give the award of most likely to receive anthrax-laced holiday greeting cards, because he's done some bad stuff to some people who are capable of doing very bad things in return. And then for Miles Person, the ill-fated mayor of Anvil, I would give the award of most likely to suck eggs. That's a classic, and I feel like it just fits for this guy. I'm sorry. For Odin Kincannon, it's a most likely to slay in a business meeting, if y'all know what I'm saying. For the cowboy / saint of killers, most likely to turn this car around, because that's exactly what he does in his very terrible and sad story. And it has very terrible and sad results. That's just who he is and what he's done. As for Fior and DeBlanc, most likely to star in a buddy cop comedy. I think it fits the two of them pretty well. For Eugene / Arseface, I would say most likely to become someone's hallucination. Again, that's kind of the path he takes after he heads to hell. And for Betsy Schenk, I would say most likely to make like Dirty Dorothy and follow the Yellow Dick Road. For Donnie Shank, her husband, I would say most likely to suffer self-induced hearing loss. It's for a good cause. All for a good cause. And then we've got Sheriff Hugo Root, most likely to find out you're a vampire. It's pretty insightful that way. We have Emily, most likely to kill you in your sleep. That applies to me as well. Tulip O'Hare, most likely to single-handedly take down a helicopter. Again, one of my favorite moments with her in the entire season. For Cassidy, most likely to eat a whole cow in the non-figurative sense. That's from the pilot episode. And last but most certainly not least, the preacher himself, Jesse Custer. Most likely to show up to church pissed drunk. Again, who he is and what he does. So that about wraps up this review. It's so good to be back. Please feel free to follow me on my other social media outlets, especially Twitter, which is also MIghtySophia. It's pretty much everywhere you can find me. Got a lot of videos to come, so hold your horses and I'll be back with more content as soon as possible, and hopefully it won't take me so long this time. Y'all are great. Thank you so much. And as always, I'll be back before you know it.